Hello and welcome back to another World of Warcraft Warlords of Draenor video. This time I'm going to be covering two different interviews. The first one is from Final Boss TV, and that's with Ian Hazzikostas, and then there's another one which was done by BlizzPlanet that involved Chris Zerhoot and Stephen Burke, and it's basically full of Warlords of Draenor information, and especially quite a lot of raiding stuff actually, and there's maybe one or two hints about Time Walker dungeons and various things like that. Overall, it's a lot of interesting stuff. Now, unfortunately, I am just completely in the middle of crazy university work. I've got a submission to do in about 36 hours from now, and that's going to involve most of the next 36 hours being awake, which will be fun, having to do a presentation on that amount of sleep. So, this has got to be more of a rough and ready video, but all the information will be here. Without further ado, let's get into the rest of the video. And first of all, we are going to cover the things that were talked about in the BlizzPlanet interview, because there's only a few and I just want to get them out of the way, but they are pretty interesting. So first of all, they said that the orcs will come through the Dark Portal, and then they will take over Blackrock Mountain, and that's basically how the Warlords of Draenor World event is going to start. I think that's actually a pretty good way to do it. I thought Karazhan isn't going to be involved, but there was some testing earlier which suggested that it may have been involved, and they later said that they were initially planning on having some sort of Karazhan style event, which would be tied in with the time manipulation that's going on. But as it stands, it seems like the Dark Portal opens and they'll all pour out, and we'll have a nice big war in our hands. I think that sounds a lot cooler than the honestly pretty crappy one that we got for Mists of Pandaria. Now then, in terms of characters, they talked a little bit about who the Alliance will be involved with in Shadowmoon Valley. Very light spoilers, but it will be Velen, Akama, that's Akama of course before he was a Broken, and then Marad. So that's pretty cool. Then also, they said that assaults on your garrison are going to happen quite a few times over time, but the interesting thing is that the more your garrison is attacked, the harder that they will get. And you'll have to keep on upgrading the item level of your followers to help fend off those attacks. Now, I'd imagine that if you fail an attack or something like that, it won't be crippling, because obviously they've said many times that they don't want you to just have to log in every single day for your garrison, and that it won't be tied in with raiding or anything like that. So, it's definitely cool though that as time goes on, the garrison assaults, which are probably going to be a major part of the garrison gameplay, are not just going to be completely trivialized. So it's nice that that's scalable content. So that's good. Next, they said that you're going to have a lot of different choices about your garrison as you level through the zones. Now, the way that they said that your choices will be as you level through the zones, maybe does that suggest that your garrison will start off at kind of like level 0, and then by the time you're level 100 be level 1? Maybe you unlock plots quite slowly as you level, perhaps? Or maybe by the time you hit level 100 you will have a level 2 garrison. Not 100% sure how that will work, but certainly it'll be interesting, and I do agree with the idea of having it ingrained with the questing experience. I think that could lead to just a nice sense of place within the world of Draenor, and I think that should be pretty good. And then finally, they just said one quick little thing about the level 90 boost. Basically that when you use the 90 boost, all the things in your bags will be mailed to you with an unlimited duration. And right now, I think they mailed to you with like a 180-day duration or something like that, so apparently that's news. Anyway, let's talk about the final boss interview. This is going to be stuffed full of just raid information and just tons of stuff. So the first thing that they talked about on the interview was Ian Hazzikostas himself. So the reason why he calls himself Watcher in the forums is because he needed a name for his character to use while he was observing the Ulduar raids on the public test realm. And also they have a TV in their design office in which the team can just sort of sit down in front of and watch the current progression during like the PTR, and they can actually watch the really cutting edge guilds progress through heroic modes to see if they can like hotfix any unintended strategies or anything like that. I think that's actually really cool. Another thing that he did was he was heavily involved on working the design of the faction champions boss in Trial of the Crusader. Oddly enough, I enjoyed that fight a ton. I don't know what the general consensus is on it though. He also wrote a few lines. One of them was the "In the Mountains" line by Thorum, and the "Suffer mortals as your pathetic magic betrays you" line from Sindragosa. I think I heard "Suffer mortals" as your pathetic magic betrays you in that voice actress's just terrible delivery so many times that I hate the phrase now. But hey, look, it's cheesy comic book writing for World of Warcraft. That can work, just not with a Sindragosa voice. Ugh. Anyway, so he also said that he did do some class design and encounter creation during his earlier time at Blizzard, but right now he's mostly overseeing the actual encounter design progress on a whole, so essentially the guy has moved up. He's now actually the lead game designer for World of Warcraft. They changed his title quite recently. He used to be the lead encounter designer. Pretty cool stuff, and the guys got promoted, so yeah, well done, Watcher. Then he also said that his least favourite fight, or at least one of them, was Rhyolith, because the steering mechanics didn't really work out too well, and he thinks that it may have been okay for a dungeon, but with 10 or 25 people trying to do it, it just didn't really pan out that well. Rhyolith was in the Firelands, by the way. And then also, he didn't like Amber Shaper Unsock, because it didn't really give players a chance to test out and practice the vehicle part of the fight before the fight. That's actually a very important thing for them to know moving forward, and honestly, I hated Amber Shaper so much. Hated. So that's definitely great. And then he said that there were a whole bunch of ways that you could deal with the elemental adds on Raggy, on the Firelands, and one of the reasons why he liked that is because just when there's multiple approaches to an encounter's mechanic, it just makes it more interesting. You have a little bit more freedom there. Sometimes encounters in MMOs can just feel like you follow a linear path that is the path to winning. It's nice when there are multiple approaches in that path, so it's very good. Now then, in terms of Miss Pandaria, he said that the week-to-week randomization of the Stone Guards boss was okay, but they didn't really like the way that you had to relearn the fight every week, and since it was the first boss of the expansion, it wasn't as nice an entry to rating as he perhaps thinks it could have been. So that's interesting to hear. Then he also said that they enjoyed the patch 5.1 daily quests and the exploration of the Timeless Isle, so they're going to be baking the good parts of both elements into Warlords of Draenor. That seems pretty good, and it definitely seems to be baked into both the end game and the questing experience. Okay, so then also, he said that if you want to log on to World of Warcraft every day, there will be some stuff for you to do, but they don't want to make you feel like you must log in every day to do something. And I think that's probably a little bit of a concern with the garrison system, though if the follower missions that you can do can be maybe 4 days long at max, then that means that if you still want the rewards, or at least maybe slightly less rewards, but still something from garrisons, you can just choose the least efficient, but least demanding version of the garrisons to do in terms of the missions you send your followers on. So that could work out pretty well, I guess. Nice to see, nice to see. Then also he said that originally the Heroic Paragons of the Klaxi was going to vary weekly, but they ended up discarding that because after seeing how it panned out in the PTR, they realized that it just wouldn't have worked out well. Yeah. Look, Paragons of the Klaxi, sure there's interesting parts of that boss fight, but I'm just gonna say, too much. You've got too much in that encounter journal. No, you know, there's not a great deal of synergy between, I don't know, it feels like it's just a whole bunch of small, kind of shitty council fights chained together, but you need to know them all at once, and I don't think that's a particularly good design. Hopefully they won't go with something like that in the future. I'd rather just have three bosses in a council fight that are each really just unique, different, and important, and very strong, rather than fighting a bunch of guys just in the Heroic Paragons, or just Paragons of the Klaxi in general, sort of way. Then also he said that Tier 14 and 15 could have gone on a little bit longer in order to reduce the amount of time that Siege of Orgrimmar was the current raid for. Yeah, kind of agree with that. Definitely true. I think perhaps Season 14... Well, 14, I think it was a bit shorter than 15. 15 certainly started to drag out a little bit for me, and the reason for that's because it was just linear. It was one linear tier. At least with 15, you were sort of flitting between 3 different locations, and I think that really did help it out. Okay, so that's Mr. Pandaria talked about. The next thing they talked about in the interview was the Warlords of Draenor beta. So they said that making expansion is, of course, quite a bit more difficult than making a patch, and the reason for that is, as you may expect, an expansion comes with a whole bunch of new systems and new features and all that sort of stuff, whereas a patch is really just adding upon things that are currently implemented. Because of that difference, it can often take longer than expected to bring an expansion out, which makes timelines and things like that a bit less predictable. And I've got to say that's true. It's hard. There's this thing called it's either Moore's Law or Parkinson's Law, which is that the time frame that it takes for you to to do a project will pretty much expand itself until the deadline or until you're basically completely screwed. And I found that in every project I've ever done, and it seems like nearly every major software engineering project, for an example, Warlords of Draenor, just seems to go beyond schedule. That just seems to be how projects go in the real world. Now, the Mists of Pandaria beta was actually a little bit different to the Warlords one. In Warlords, they're going to be not really inviting as many people, anywhere near as many people actually, because they just want it to be a limited testing bed where they can get feedback from people in a very direct manner. Whereas with the Mists of Pandaria beta, because of the annual pass, they just needed to let in so many people, and that wasn't really conducive to a good testing environment. And I think that it also meant that a lot of people played a decent bit of Pandaria before it came out, and then we're just kind of a bit, burnt out on it quicker than usual. I suppose that's definitely something that they maybe would want to avoid running into again. That was interesting. So the next thing about the Warlords beta that he said was that 14 of the 17 raid bosses in the very first tier have been tested internally at Blizzard, and that by the time guilds are invited, all 17 bosses will be ready for testing. What does that mean? Well, basically, by the time the alpha test is going out to guilds and stuff like that, all their bosses will be ready for testing. That means that, well, does that mean that they're shooting for maybe a faster beta process than previously? Like a faster but more intensive one? Because I remember they were actually talking about having separate beta realms which would boost you up to the maximum level, with a whole bunch of gear that you could only use inside raids, so that you could specifically do raid testing. So I guess because of that, they really are just looking at condensing the beta testing experience and just making it very much, based on the feedback, not really on playing the game early, which is really, that is what it should be. Okay, so next he said that as they move from expansion to expansion, they are definitely hiring more people, but with Warlords there is a ramp up in terms of the new hires that they've been making, and that having a large team does present quite a few challenges, but things should be better from Warlords on. Now, with teams and stuff like that, they need to integrate the new staff into the pre-existing structure, they need to get all the project managers and all the various things up to date, and there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of HR, just a lot of sorting stuff out. That means that there's probably a good few months delay before staff are really able to be productive. Hell, you know what, I'd say it's probably only really after 6 months at a job that you really start to groove in, just fit into your job and start working really efficiently, and that's something that will of course affect the new hires at Blizzard. So hopefully from Warlords on we'll get yearly expansions and faster patches and all that good stuff. We can look, at least we can always hope, right? Maybe. I want them to get to that stage, because getting a new continent or planet every 6 months, or not 6 months, every 12 months would be great, just having that constant change in scenery. Anyway, so in terms of the raids themselves and the encounters and the mechanics and that kind of thing, he said that no vehicle fights are just planned for Warlords of Draenor at all, ever. Yes, I hated Amber Shaper and Sock. In general, I just don't like vehicle fights in a raid, and I'm just glad that they've learned that experience and that they're not going to do it. And then also, he said that there are no mythic-only bosses for the first tier of Warlords because they usually fit in with a larger raid zone. Essentially, I guess he means Throne of Thunder, or one of those things where they just kind of make a separate island or a separate big thing, put a big raid there, and say, hey, look, boom, there's, this is the new raid, crazy big raid, and it's got an even harder guy who's secret at the end. Unlike, say, Blackrock Foundry and Highmall, which are going to be 6 or 7 boss long sort of things. I think one of them's actually 10 bosses long. Whoops. Anyway, you know what I mean. I think that's okay, I guess. But the mythic-only bosses are certainly fun, and it's something that's cool to watch, even just as a spectator. So that's nice that they're at least planning on doing it at some point. Okay, so he also said that they're not going to be using limited attempts for any of the first tier Warlords of Draenor stuff. And back in Icecrown, what they actually did is they limited attempts at heroic boss. I think it was heroic bosses. I'm not sure exactly, but basically they encouraged raiders to use their alt raids to learn the fights before doing it on their main character. And this worked out really well on heroic Lich King and that kind of thing, because your alts couldn't really get so far, so people had to use their mains for the heroic Lich King progression. and because you only got so many attempts per week, it meant that it was very much about planning and skill and making each attempt matter a lot. Still though, they've decided not to go with that system for this expansion. Then next he said that the team is currently working on the intro experience, and that's basically why they're not really ready to invite players yet. But he did say that a lot of the other content is ready, and it's just that since the intro experience is the first thing they want players to test, they really need to get that polished up before they can let people into the alpha. That, I guess, is promising because it means that, sure, we have one bottleneck, but the rest of the content is in a very good state, so that's nice to hear. Then he also said that flexible raid sizes will allow you to have anywhere between 10 and 30 players in the raid, provided that the client server performance is fine. That's very good, that's 5 bigger than we currently have, and that's totally cool. And by the way, if I sound kind of just like groggy and tired, it's because it's 4:11 AM and I just finished a 14-hour stint of coding. Just thought I'd throw that in there to explain why this video is not up to the usual standards. Anyway, so he also said that integration with the environment worked out well on the Siegecrafter Black Fuse fight. So we may see more fights in the future where the actual room itself is involved in the fight. I think that's cool. There was a lot of interesting traversal with Siegecrafter, and yeah, just look, they should use every element at their disposal. Every element at their disposal to just enhance fight mechanics or make new mechanics. At the end of the day, they're making, 60 bosses, 70 bosses in expansion. Any bit of unique variation they can get, they should use, and that's nice to hear. And then he also said that the Immortal achievement for Naxxramas, I think that just involves the vast majority of your raid not dying, and that was only really feasible for Nax because it was relatively easy, but he doesn't believe it would be feasible for the current raids. Then he also said that when they were testing flexible raiding on the 5.4 PTR, the gear was actually scaled down way too much, which resulted in the raid feeling like a normal, not a flex, which was actually a little bit of a sneak demonstration that scaling would work for normal modes as well. So they were kind of duping all of the PTR testers there, which was rather interesting. So thanks, Blizzard. I was involved in one of those tests, and yeah, it was definitely pretty tricky. Alright, so next, he said that patch 6.0 will be live for 4 to 6 weeks before the expansion launches to allow people to test the changes. I think that's definitely good because there are major changes coming to classes, and people need time to be able to play around with them and get really comfortable. Then he also said that, as we know, LFR will no longer drop set pieces, but the loot will drop much more often to offset that change, and he said that right now you have to run LFR for months to get all the loot you want, which is not a fun experience. I completely agree, 100%. I don't think that LFR is designed to be ran on a weekly basis, like just religiously with full runs, so it's definitely nice that they've realized that and they're going to design LFR loot so it actually fits the way that most people want to experience LFR content. Alright, so look guys, I'm going to end the video here. There are still some topics to cover, and you'll get to hear me talking about those topics and of course my opinions on them in a video probably tomorrow. The reason why I'm stopping this now is because I just feel like I'm about to collapse, but I still want to make sure there's something there for you guys to watch tomorrow and find out the information and sort of get my thoughts on the whole shebang. So anyway, thank you for soldiering on this far. Hope you found some of that information interesting. Tomorrow we'll talk about things like raid lockouts, legendary quests, class changes, challenge mode, spell visuals, proving grounds, and time walker dungeons, and also garrisons. Well, by the way, just time walker stuff. Don't worry, it's not like I'm holding a giant announcement or anything back there. There isn't a giant announcement. It's cool. Anyway, I'm going to go sleep. This project stuff will be over by tomorrow, and the channel will thankfully return back to normal. So thank you, and I will see you next time.